A Soviet Union B-59 submarine in the Caribbean Sea was hiding underwater just a few kilometers away from America, fully ready to attack. At that moment, the US Navy found out, and to bring the submarine up, they dropped small bombs underwater. The Soviet submarine, whose contact with headquarters thousands of kilometers away, had also been cut off. Its captain thought that perhaps the war had started, and now the time had come to fire the nuclear torpedo missile. This was the time when tensions between the US and the Soviets had risen to the extreme, and the thousands of nuclear missiles of both countries were only one button press away. The captain of the Soviet submarine was just about to press the nuclear missile button when suddenly something happened that saved this world from destruction. This incident happened during those 12 days of history when the Cold War between America and the Soviet Union was getting out of control. What happened was that in World Wars II, the whole world had seen the side effects of the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also the dangerous face of America, if anyone could challenge America's power. It was the Soviet Union. Because immediately after World War II, the Soviet Union was the second country that had succeeded in acquiring nuclear technology. They conducted several nuclear tests and indirectly signaled to America that we are not Japan who will sit silently after the attacks. This was the era when the Cold War was going on between America and the Soviet Union. Both countries kept their nuclear weapons ready every moment against each other, whether the attack had to be from land, air, or sea. The world knew very well that if either one launched the first nuclear attack, the other country would respond with nuclear missiles, and the destruction resulting from it would be far more horrific than the nuclear attacks on Japan. So horrific that it was believed that perhaps 70% of the world's human population would perish. To make these attacks even more effective, American and Soviet bomber aircraft remained in the air all the time, their nuclear submarines also hiding in international waters, waiting only for a signal. Besides this, America also installed its nuclear weapons in Turkey and Italy because these two countries were NATO allies and also very close to the Soviet Union's border. This made America's position stronger because from there it would be easier to attack the western part of the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union learned of this, they also decided to install their nuclear weapons close to America. The best spot for this was none other than Cuba Island, located only 200 kilometers southeast of America. At that time, there was a pro-communist government in Cuba, which America could not digest at any cost. In the eyes of America, Cuba was an ally of the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was in fact the fortress of communism. Communism meant that all businesses would remain under government control, and everyone would get an equal share, meaning classes like rich or poor would not form in society. Whereas America wanted capitalism to run throughout the world, a kind of free market where anyone could do business and generate their own profit. America wanted to attack Cuba, right next to it, and bring the capitalist system there as well. But Cuban President Fidel Castro had the support of the Soviet Union, who also supplied weapons to Cuba. But under the cover of making good relations with Cuba, the Soviet Union was thinking of something else. At that time, Soviet President Nikita Khrushchev cracked a secret deal with Cuban President Fidel Castro, in which it was decided that the Soviet Union would install its intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, in Cuba, and in return it would also protect Cuba from American attack. But the second advantage of this was that now, under this pretext, Soviet nuclear warheads would also be able to easily hit the South American region. No one got even a whisper of this deal, and the Soviet Union secretly began installing its ICBMs at various locations in Cuba. But this news spread like a rumor throughout America, spreading fear and panic among the people that Soviet nuclear missiles had already been installed in Cuba just 200 kilometers away from Florida. The White House denied all these reports, and during the 1962 state election campaign assured the people that these reports were baseless. But to find out the truth, the U.S. Air Force's U-2 spy plane was used. The spy plane captured photographs from above Cuba Island, which clearly showed medium range R-12 and intermediate range R-14 ballistic missile facilities. These photographs were enough to prove that the Soviet Union had tightened its encirclement against America's southeast part. This news struck American President John F. Kennedy like lightning, and to teach Cuba, on which America was already very angry, a lesson, he decided to carry out an airstrike there. The plan was that by airstrikes first, the Soviet ICBMs would be destroyed, and then Cuba would be occupied with full force, which had been due for a long time. This plan of the American president was actually equal to inviting World War III, because an attack on Soviet missiles in Cuba would be considered an attack on the Soviet Union itself, and if that happened, nuclear war would erupt from both sides, which no one would be able to control. On the other hand, when the Soviet Union learned of America's intentions, they also prepared themselves to respond to the attack. In this preparation, there was also a Soviet B-59 nuclear submarine, which was mentioned at the beginning of this video. It was ordered to remain hidden in the depths of the Caribbean near Cuba. The submarine crew had full authority that if war broke out, they would not even need Moscow's permission to launch nuclear torpedo missiles. It had gone so deep underwater, hiding from the eyes of the US Navy, that its radio contact with Moscow had also been cut off. Meanwhile, the US Navy also suspected the presence of a Soviet submarine in the Caribbean. They dropped small bombs in that location to signal the submarine to come up and identify itself. The bombs dropped by the US Navy were actually signal depth charges. This is an anti-submarine weapon which, if it exploded nearby, could destroy the entire submarine. Inside the Soviet B-59, the captain, who had already lost contact with Moscow, thought that perhaps the war had begun, and now the time had come to fire the nuclear torpedo missile. Although the crew had full authority, before pressing the nuclear button, the agreement of all 3 officers present in the submarine was absolutely necessary. Out of the 3 officers, 2 were in favor that the nuclear torpedo missile should be fired. While 1 officer was not in favor of this attack, a debate broke out with Executive Officer Vasily Arkhipov argued that firing the nuclear missile was very risky while they didn't even have confirmation that the war had started. This debate continued for several minutes, and then the decision was made to surface the B-59 and first re-establish contact with Moscow in order to understand the actual situation. At the time when this whole incident was happening inside the B-59 submarine, at the same time, a meeting was held between the Russian and American presidents to neutralize the rising tension, in which it was decided that the Soviet Union would withdraw its nuclear missiles from Cuba, but only on the condition that afterwards America would not occupy Cuba. This was the deal that was presented to the public. But later, it became known that America had secretly also agreed to remove its nuclear missiles from Italy and Turkey. This tension, which lasted for 12 days, is known today in the world as the Cuban Missile Crisis. During these 12 days, the tensions rose so much that both countries had even sent their nuclear missiles into space. This meant that if we survived and war did not start, these missiles would be destroyed in space. And if we did not survive, then these missiles would come straight down on their targets. But since this crisis had now ended, these nuclear missiles were destroyed in space. Meanwhile, when the B-59 submarine surfaced in the Caribbean, they contacted Moscow, upon which they were ordered to return to the Soviet Union. Historians believe that Executive Officer Vasily Arkhipov was the man whose historic decision is the reason why we are alive in this world today. Otherwise, this nuclear war would have been so severe that perhaps there would not have remained a trace of humans in this world. Hope you will also like and share this video wholeheartedly. Thank you very much for your loving comments. We will meet in the next wonderful video.